Cartago, terra de mistérios fundada há mais de 2000 anos. Guiados pela riqueza, poder e ambição, alguns pioneiros construíram um império que dominou o Mediterrâneo por mais de 600 anos. Eles desenvolveram as mais avançadas tecnologias da época, tanto no país quanto nas mais remotas regiões então conhecidas. Seu coração era um grande porto que abrigava centenas de navios de guerra, a mais formidável esquadra da antiguidade.
These ships are coming up fast. People see them coming. Carthage is here.
Mas negras nuvens se acumulavam no horizonte. Cartago finalmente ganhara um inimigo à sua altura. Uma superpotência como o mundo ainda não vira. Roma.
The Romans saw Carthage as a spear pointed at the very heart of Rome.
Nessa batalha de vida ou morte, apenas um dos dois sairia vitorioso. E o outro seria reduzido a ruínas. Construindo um império. Cartago. Sangue. Massacre. Brilhantes conquistas da engenharia e atos de bravura suicida marcariam o embate das duas superpotências do mundo antigo. Roma e Cartago. Foi uma luta de morte. E o resultado mudaria o curso da história ocidental.
Welcome to Tunisia. Hello, I'm Peter Weller. When I was a kid, I heard the name Carthage. And I knew it was an ancient city. I didn't know exactly where it was. I'd heard of Hannibal and the elephants crossing the Alps and these famous wars with Rome. And I learned these wars were called Punic Wars after the Latin word punici, which is what Rome called Carthage. But I had no idea where Carthage was. Well, it was here, in the northern tip of Tunisia, and behind me is the modern capital of Tunis, a city of about 2 million people sitting on the Mediterranean Sea. By the 4th century BC, Carthage was an absolute empire, dominating the Mediterranean with a formidable navy. But the original legend of Carthage starts in the eastern Mediterranean city of Tyre. The Phoenician city of Tyre and a beautiful woman named Dido, and the jealousy and greed and lust for power that would absolutely rip a royal family apart.
Dido era a linda filha do rei Muto. O marido, um fenício ambicioso, morrera prematuramente assassinado por Pigmalião, irmão de Dido. Assustada, Dido fugiu de Tiro, atravessou o Mediterrâneo e desceu em uma terra desconhecida na ponte norte da África. Ali ela negociou com os nativos a compra das terras que pudessem ser cobertas com a pele de um boi. Inteligente e astuta, Dido cortou a pele em tiras finíssimas e com elas cercou uma grande região de terras férteis. E foi ali, sob seu governo, que Cart-Hadasht, ou Nova Cidade, seria construída.
When they came to Carthage, sized up the bay, looked at the mountains, looked at the flow of the rivers, looked at a place, the Bursa, which would be a great defensible fortress site, they said, this is it. This is where we will build our city.
A povoação de Dido, Cartago, logo prosperou. Segundo a lenda, a história de sua beleza, inteligência e riqueza correu o mundo até chegar a Jarbas, rei dos mouros.
Part of Dido's story is this tale of the king of the Libyan natives, Jarbas, who wishes to marry her, but she refuses to do so. According to the storytellers, it's out of love for her assassinated husband, and she climbs onto a self-built funeral pyre and burns herself up.
E foi aqui, de suas cinzas, que um dos maiores impérios do mundo se ergueu. Cercados de vizinhos poderosos e com pouca terra, os fenícios de Cartago voltaram-se para o mar. Eram pioneiros, pragmáticos, abertos a novas ideias e extremamente inovadores.
When Dido established the city, the new city, a lot of people's eyes obviously opened wide and said, hey, a new city, a new start. And as these trading routes that Carthage pioneered expanded, it very rapidly became as international a city as anywhere then in the world.
Nos 200 anos seguintes, Cartago evoluiu para a grande potência mediterrânea, fundando colônias na Córcega, Ibiza e norte da África.
By around 700, maybe 650 BC, Carthage is a force to be reckoned with. Everybody's heard of it. Nobody messes with it. It's a very important city.
Através de extensas rotas comerciais no século VII a.C., os novos territórios geraram grandes tesouros para Cartago. A população chegou a 300 mil, tornando-a uma das maiores cidades do mundo.
To some extent, you could compare it to a Manhattan. This is a huge population living in a relatively small area. So this is an important commercial and cultural hub, not only for North Africa, but also for the entire Western Mediterranean world.
Antes dos cartagineses, grandes obras de engenharia tinham sido lançadas em honra aos deuses. O foco de Cartago era outro. Tal como a América 2.500 anos depois, a riqueza de Cartago atraía legiões que buscavam fazer fortuna. Os arquitetos e engenheiros da cidade tinham de achar um modo de acolher a todos. Um desafio que desembocaria na maior explosão urbana da antiguidade.
There was something very important to the Carthaginian spirit, to its psyche, about staying within the walls of Carthage. So the pressure to design buildings that would accommodate people who wanted to live within the city was very strong.
Os cartagineses foram os primeiros em grande escala a fazer do céu da cidade sua propriedade privada, construindo apartamentos.
These were as high as 6 stories, very densely populated. Why? Because people wanted to come to Carthage. It was a successful, happening place. If you wanted to get on in life, you wanted to come to Carthage.
Para erguer uma grande cidade, era preciso primeiro achar um bom material com que construir. A solução estava em El Awaria, na Baía de Túnez. Nessa longínqua pedreira havia um suprimento aparentemente inesgotável de calcário, que era fácil de trabalhar e rápido na secagem.
Limestone is the perfect choice for building. And there were limestone depositions geologically in that area, in that basin, very close at hand.
Os arqueólogos acreditam que, tal como os egípcios, os cartagineses cortavam cada bloco de pedra pelo método mais simples, com água e madeira.
After they've chiseled a dotted line channel along the face of a rock, they take a wooden wedge, stick it in there, if it's deep enough, and then wet the wood. And what will happen naturally is the wood will expand with the water, and then it'll naturally crack the stone.
A pressão crescente da madeira em expansão provocava uma fissura na pedra quase perfeitamente reta. A partir daí, eles separavam os blocos usando alavancas simples. Assim que os grandes blocos eram cortados e transportados para a cidade, os cartagineses iam superpondo lajes e pilares, para rapidamente transformar Cartago em uma capital dinâmica.
It's very clear that by using stone in the first place, they weren't ready to pick up and go elsewhere. They were looking down the long term.
For each metropolis to survive, it needs a constant source of running water. Carthage was no different, so the ancient city engineers turned to cisterns, like this. Each cistern was made of a double layer of eggshell, ash, and clay, made the cistern absolutely watertight. Every home enjoyed access to a cistern through a series of pipes and channels. Carthaginians had fully equipped bathrooms with tubs and sinks and even showers years before ancient Rome.
We have clear evidence, way before the foundation of Carthage, of domestic plumbing. But it is Carthage by 600 BC or thereabouts, and certainly Carthaginian town of Kirkuane by 450 BC, that we have the first evidence of a unified system of water usage and, critically, sewage. Any fool can put in a bathroom, but the question is what to do with the waste water. And at Kerguelen you see very clearly a unified single system that has piped water to the rooms that need it, the kitchen and the bathroom, but then piping the wastewater out to a common sewage system. This was evolutionary, yes, but it is also typically Carthaginian because it's also revolutionary.
No século VI a.C., Cartago florescia como importante cidade-estado, rodeada de magníficos templos, palácios cintilantes e altos edifícios. Mas se a chama de Cartago brilhava forte, a dos primos fenícios estava se apagando. A grande cidade fenícia de Tiro caiu nas mãos da Babilônia em 574 a.C. Cartago teria de prosseguir sozinha. Sem demora, os cartagineses saíram para explorar a costa do norte da África, continuando a expandir o império e conquistando mares.
The Carthaginians saved money by covering their stone houses with smooth stucco, making them appear to be constructed of expensive marble.
520 a.C. 3.000 remos impulsionavam 60 navios através das colunas de Hércules, conhecidas hoje como Estreito de Gibraltar. O navegador Hanno, grande almirante de Cartago, explorava os limites do mundo conhecido. Preparava-se para lançar um ousado plano que poderia conduzir ao domínio total do Mediterrâneo.
So every great explorer, Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, who sailed off into the unknown, seems to me a very strong parallel for the original and best of them, Hanno the navigator.
Hanno set sail to extend the boundaries of the Carthaginian network of colonies and exchange, not mere trading activities, but planting whole cities of new settlers to maintain control of land and access to its resources.
A técnica de Cartago nos mares trouxe-lhe poder e riqueza. No século VI a.C., as ilhas da Córcega, Sardenha e Baleares achavam-se sob seu controle. A força desse poder fluía de uma maravilha da engenharia, o Porto de Cartago.
This is the absolute pinnacle of Carthaginian engineering.
Embora os documentos sejam escassos, os arqueólogos acreditam que o porto foi construído já na época de Hanno. Contudo, foi no auge da cidade, no século II a.C., que o porto foi reformado. Tinha tecnologia superior à de qualquer lugar do mundo e era o centro vital de Cartago.
It was part of Carthage, it was the heart of Carthage. It was the lungs of Carthage. It was everything to Carthage, both naval and commercial.
O porto tinha uma entrada comum de 22 metros de largura que podia ser fechado com correntes de ferro. Dentro havia duas marinas separadas, sendo a primeira para navios de carga e comércio.
The mercantile harbour, the commercial harbour, was organized with conventional wharves to make as easy as possible the loading and unloading of goods. So in Carthage, readily one can imagine in, say, 400 BC, you would see all the goods there were in the then known world being bought, being brought, being sold in Carthage.
O segundo, circular, foi projetado para uso militar. Uma série de 30 docas posicionadas simetricamente, mais 140 ancoradouros no perímetro do porto circular, permitiam a entrada e o tráfego confortável de 220 navios. Hoje restam as escavações a seco das docas, uma pálida lembrança do poder naval de Cartago.
This is all that's left of the Kothon, or military harbor of ancient Carthage. A kothon was an interior port carved out of the land as opposed to an exterior port attached to the seaside. Now, with all these beautiful villas around here, it's kind of hard to imagine that this harbor was the launch point for the wealth and power of ancient Carthage. Now, the nerve center for this maritime hub was that circular island out there where there were 40 or 50 slots for boat dry dock. And on top of that island was a big tower where trumpeters would blare signals and heralds would deliver orders and admirals would oversee operations like observing what ships were coming in from sea, be they friend or foe, while at the same time those ships couldn't very well observe what was going on in this port.
Nobody has anything approaching this potency, this power, let alone this navigational and seafaring skill. So when the barriers are taken off the channel and within, they're scrambled, as they did in World War II with aeroplanes, these ships are coming out fast down this channel and out into the Mediterranean. People see them coming. Carthage is here.
Por 2 séculos, Cartago dominou o Mediterrâneo. Mas um temível rival do outro lado do mar desenvolvia sua máquina militar de força mortífera e sem paralelo. Roma. Esses 2 superpoderes logo entrariam em conflito pela joia do Mediterrâneo, a Sicília.
Carthage was built to trade, and Sicily was critical to that trading. Why? Because it's right bang slap in the middle of the most important shipping lane in the world. Whoever controls Sicily controls these vital trade routes. The Romans saw the enormous riches that Carthage could command, and it started to just elbow into them. And the Carthaginians nudge back and say, hang on, we were there first. Please, as it were, get your tanks off my lawn.
Mas tanto Roma como Cartago usavam a Sicília. A tensão desencadearia uma série de guerras que abalariam o velho mundo.
The Romans saw Carthage as a spear pointed at the very heart of Rome and at their own burgeoning trade empire. So, of course, they felt they had to eliminate it.
As lutas ficariam conhecidas como Guerras Púnicas, devido à palavra latina para cartaginês. O resultado mudaria o curso da história do mundo e Cartago ganharia um dos maiores gênios militares de todos os tempos.
Some historians believe the sailors of Carthage were the first to sail to the Americas, nearly 1,500 years before Christopher Columbus.
At the beginning of the 3rd century BC, the Republic of Rome is called down into southern Italy by a Greek town to help that town against pirates. Now, it's not long after that 2 Sicilian cities get at it. One of them, Messina, originally asked Carthage for help, but then they go, nah, let's ask Rome, because they're closer, probably a better deal. Syracuse fights Messina and Rome 1 battle, quits, gives up, turns himself over to Rome, and Rome, in the span of decades, has all of southern Italy and eastern Sicily. This really POs Carthage, and thus begins the First Punic War. And the outcome of this war will not only decide who owns Sicily, but who's going to be ruler of the entire southern Mediterranean Sea.
264 a.C. Roma e Cartago começaram a Primeira Guerra Púnica. 17 anos depois, os dois ainda mediam forças, exaustos numa orgia de sangue. Essa situação virou apenas quando um feroz e carismático chefe militar, Amílcar Barca, assumiu o comando do exército cartaginês.
Hamilcar was the first great general of the Carthaginian Empire. He's the man with charisma. He's the man who knows how to get the job done, how to save their coals from the fire.
Between 247 and 242 BC, this fiery military tactician, Hamilcar Barca, sweeps into Sicily. He's dynamic, he's powerful, and he's absolutely ruthless. But what gives Hamilcar his real confidence is that at his back he has a new sleek form of warship called the Quinquereme, quin meaning 5 banks of rowers. The Quinquereme isn't really developed by the Carthaginians, it's developed by the Greeks. But what the Carthaginians do is make this sea-going battering ram huge.
In that period of the Punic Wars, wow, they were the feat of shipbuilding and engineering.
Quincunrim apparently had 5 banks of oars. Now, there's been some debate exactly how that worked, but it is believed that there were 3 levels with 5 guys, 2 on the top 2 levels, each with an oar, and then 1 guy at the bottom. But whatever the case, it was a bigger, larger version of the trireme. However, even though it's a bigger version, the tactics involved in naval warfare are exactly the same. The main purpose of these ships is to ram the enemy ship. That's what they were engineered for.
Equipados com o esporão revestido de bronze, eram também muito velozes e manobráveis.
These were very, very, very quick. Trying to catch a Carthaginian warship was trying to hit Muhammad Ali in his prime as a boxer.
Quincunrim padrão tinha 40 metros de comprimento, entre 3 e 4 de largura e abrigava até 420 marinheiros. Completo e equipado, Quincunrim pesava mais de 100 toneladas e no mar aberto virava uma máquina mortífera.
This thing is just coming straight at you at a speed you've never dreamt of as possible. And bang! The whole of your boat shakes, your ship shakes. And you start to sink. Compare that with the trireme, where often the model was probably much more to engage with the enemy ship and have land fight at sea. The Carthaginians didn't mess about like that. They wanted to get in, they hit you once and you drown and they're gone. To hit the next one, deadly.
Now, the genius of the Carthaginians was in figuring out how to mass produce these ships. They took sort of prefabricated parts and put them all together on an assembly line. So to an enemy, no sooner would a Quincunrim be sunk than another one would appear on the horizon. And this was a distinct disadvantage for the Roman Navy until they came upon a wrecked Quincunrim, and they sort of reverse engineered it. They deconstructed it, figured out how it was put together, put it back together, and made it their own.
They captured a grounded Carthaginian Quincunrim and made dozens of copies of these. In fact, the copies weren't as well made and were made out of green wood, and after one season they fell to pieces. But never mind, that's all the time the Romans needed to turn the tide.
A frota romana e a cartaginesa agora achavam-se iguais, com o equivalente a armas de destruição em massa para decidir a soberania do Mediterrâneo. 241 a.C. As 2 esquadras se encontraram nas ilhas Egade, na costa da Sicília, em uma das maiores batalhas navais da história.
In the hostilities of the First Punic War, the Battle of the Agates Islands, fought off the coast of Sicily, was a turning point.
Na batalha entre 2 frotas brilhantemente comandadas, Cartago tinha a vantagem do número. Mas suas máquinas mortíferas achavam-se lotadas de cereais para o exército de Amílcar, acampado ali perto, na Sicília.
Many ships were sunk or lost or captured. People weren't expecting that.
Now, the Carthaginians try to make a break for it, but they are unable to do so because of this extra weight. That gives the Romans the victory.
Foi desastre estratégico. No fim, os romanos fizeram quase 30.000 prisioneiros. Sem condições de substituir tantas tropas, Amílcar foi forçado a se render, batendo em retirada para Cartago. Assim, o pêndulo do poder no Mediterrâneo inclinava-se perigosamente para Roma. Nessa vitória, Roma ganhou não só a Sicília, como o domínio da Córcega, da Sardenha e das ilhas entre a Sicília e a África. Para quebrar a espinha de Cartago, Roma exigiu o pagamento de uma multa astronômica. Mas Cartago não desistiu e voltou-se para a Espanha a fim de conseguir novas riquezas.
The Carthaginians send Hamilcar Barca to Spain, so his goal in 237 is to conquer as much of Spain as possible.
Amílcar levou 9 anos de árduas batalhas para conquistar as tribos nativas espanholas. No fim, as terras do sul do rio Ebro tornaram-se parte do Império Cartaginês. Mas por essa conquista, Amílcar pagou com a vida. Em 228 a.C., ele tombou em uma batalha contra uma tribo rebelde.
Hamilcar's death in Spain was a great blow to Carthage, but it was by no means the end of Carthage. In fact, it opened the way for a whole new initiative.
Legend has it that Hamilcar's 9-year-old son begged to watch his father lead Carthage into battle with Spain, and the father agreed on one condition, that the son would promise eternal hatred of Rome and commitment to that republic's defeat. And it was thus the son, named Hannibal, became the instrument of his father's revenge. And this was the first step on a path that would transform Hannibal into the most devastating foe that the Republic of Rome would ever face.
In 1969, archaeologists discovered a sunken Punic warship with cannabis on board. It's thought the herb was brewed into a tea to calm rowers' nerves.
211 a.C. Espectro rondava a República de Roma. Fora de suas muralhas, com um exército pronto para atacar, achava-se o homem que os romanos temiam e odiavam acima de tudo. Aníbal, o grande general cartaginês. Brilhante, impiedoso e sofisticado, era o pior pesadelo de Roma. Como que por mágica, Aníbal havia penetrado as defesas de Roma. Mas a mágica era apenas o gênio estratégico de Aníbal e o modo como usava seu corpo de engenheiros, um dos melhores do mundo.
There's no doubt in my mind that Hannibal wasn't one of the greatest generals in history. I think demonstrably he is the greatest general in history.
O gênio de Aníbal nasceu do zelo religioso de destruir Roma, a ele transmitido pelo pai. Em 221 a.C., ele recebeu as ferramentas para a tarefa e aos 26 anos assumiu o comando do exército cartaginês.
Hannibal was certainly Hamilcar's son. He was a crafty politician, a brilliant strategist and military man, but his real genius was in knowing when to use all of the great engineering developments that Carthage had at its disposal.
Comandante de coragem de aço, Aníbal lançaria uma das mais incríveis campanhas de ataque que o mundo já vira. Roma tinha o controle do Mediterrâneo, ou seja, Aníbal não poderia chegar ao inimigo pelo mar. Determinado a cumprir a promessa que fizera ao pai de destruir Roma, Aníbal partiu para o impossível. Marcharia por terra através dos Alpes até o coração do Império Romano.
Now, Hannibal knows he's greatly outnumbered. He knows he has a relatively small army in comparison to the Romans, but he does come up with a strategy which he believes will bring him victory. And what he has to do is take his army to Italy itself and attack the Romans on their home field.
Aníbal partiu em 218 a.C. Tinha um exército de 90.000 homens, 12.000 cavalos e 37 elefantes comprados de vizinhos do sul.
Elephants had been used in battle for centuries before this. They could be the turning point in a battle because the cavalry of the enemy could not withstand elephants. Therefore, Hannibal believes it's worth it to try to get these elephants to Italy.
Em outubro, eles tinham percorrido mais de 1.000 quilômetros quando depararam com o primeiro grande obstáculo: o turbulento rio Ródano, na França.
Even at its narrowest, shallowest time of the year, the Rhone River is still going to be somewhere between 100 to 150 to 200 meters wide. It's going to be daunting to all of Hannibal's field engineers.
Do outro lado, grande número de gauleses aguardavam para combater. Mas a muralha de água era um obstáculo mortal que devia ser transposto primeiro. Os engenheiros de Aníbal teriam de domar a mãe natureza.
Not only are the engineering feats daunting, but you also have crowds of insubordinate and hostile tribes waiting on the other side of the river.
A solução seria um dos mais espetaculares feitos de engenharia. Uma série de jangadas gigantescas que levavam os animais e suprimentos de uma margem a outra em tempo recorde.
These rafts were about 200 feet long and 50 feet wide. Now that means that you can't just use one single tree trunk. You have to also put multiple trees together and then lash those together too. This requires more than a Boy Scout knowledge of knots.
Com rapidez e eficiência, os soldados de Aníbal abateram enormes coníferas na floresta adjacente e amarraram os troncos com fortes cordas. Os engenheiros tinham de considerar também a psique dos elefantes. Assim, cobriram os troncos com uma camada de sarrafos e outra de terra bem socada, para os elefantes acharem que estavam em terra firme. Quando tudo estava pronto, Aníbal deu sinal para soltar as jangadas. Os gauleses que aguardavam ficaram estupefatos quando viram o general cartaginês liderando o exército, a cavalaria e os elefantes através das águas turbulentas do Ródano. Quando ele chegou à margem oposta, os gauleses, tomados de pânico, fugiram sem tentar atacar. A operação toda levara pouco mais que 9 dias.
I think the crossing of the Rhone in such a short space of time using rudimentary equipment is one of the great achievements of military history. And people slightly forget the small engineering miracles that made all this possible.
Aníbal e seu exército continuaram rumo ao sopé dos Alpes. O inverno chegava e os soldados sentiam fome e exaustão. À medida que subiam, depararam com outro obstáculo que parecia intransponível. Rochedos escarpados. Mas os engenheiros tiveram uma ideia que permitiria ao exército não só ultrapassá-los, como atravessá-los.
The stratagem of crossing the Alps certainly shocked the people of Italy. No one expected an army with elephants to make it across. And although the Alps may have seemed in places impassable, this idea of breaking up the mountains themselves to create a pathway to get your pachyderms across was a brilliant idea.
Now, how did Hannibal get his men, not to mention all those elephants, up, over, around, or through these giant boulders? Well, according to the Roman historian Livy, he came up with an ingenious plan along with his engineers that would literally move mountains. They cut big crevices through these boulders, and then they got wood from the surrounding forest. They'd wrap these boulders in the wood, and when the wind was right, they'd torch the wood. The rocks would heat up, and just when they were hot enough, they'd pour boiling vinegar into the crevices, which would shatter or melt the rocks such that his men could break them apart with iron implements. Now, what was Hannibal doing up in the Alps with all this vinegar? Well, if this is true, and we like to think it was, otherwise how did he get across the Alps? It speaks volumes to the genius of this brilliant general. I'll tell you one thing, after navigating the snow of the Alps, the sight of the plains of northern Italy must have been very, very welcome.
Em agosto de 216 a.C., perto de Canas, no sul da Itália, Aníbal novamente enfrentou as tropas romanas comandadas por Terêncio Varro em um conflito decisivo que selaria o destino dos dois impérios. Ao nascer da aurora, Aníbal reuniu um exército de 50.000 homens, reforçados por mercenários contratados contra os 90.000 soldados de Varro. Varro decidiu esmagar o inimigo atacando o centro do exército de Aníbal. Esse foi seu grande erro. Adivinhando a estratégia de Varro, Aníbal ordenou à cavalaria que cercasse as fileiras romanas pela retaguarda.
Hannibal had certainly done his homework in studying the psychology of his opponents, and he was able to trick them into his center, and then his forces could engulf them.
Completamente cercados, os romanos foram derrotados ali mesmo. Apenas 3.500 romanos conseguiram fugir. 10.000 foram feitos prisioneiros e 70.000 pereceram na batalha.
At the Battle of Cannae, the single greatest defeat ever inflicted on a Roman army throughout its entire history. And of course we have to go to World War I to find a scale of slaughter as big.
Canas foi uma obra-prima da estratégia militar, mas Aníbal não conseguiu tirar vantagem de suas vitórias. Continuou lutando por 13 anos, montando sítio após sítio contra Roma e cidades adjacentes, mas a vitória final não chegava. Aníbal conseguia vencê-los no campo, mas não tinha armas para tomar a capital romana. Em 204 a.C., Roma tentou outra ofensiva e lançou um ataque contra Cartago. Aníbal precisou voltar à pátria para defendê-la.
In 204 BC, Scipio Africanus, who had already beaten the Carthaginians in Spain, convinced Rome to let him go around Hannibal altogether and attack Carthage directly. Hannibal was recalled to his city to defend it. Now, these two heavyweights met and spoke. We have no idea what they said to one another. It's lost to history. In 202 BC, they met again at the Battle of Zama. And Hannibal was defeated, and he was forced to surrender to an enemy that he'd spent his entire life trying to destroy. He would not fulfill his father's wishes. He was exiled from Carthage, and years later, near present-day Turkey, he committed suicide.
A derrota de Cartago no fim da Segunda Guerra Púnica forçou o Império a se submeter ao odiado rival.
They are forced to surrender in 202 BC. The Romans again impose very harsh peace terms on the Carthaginians, meaning, first of all, they must again pay an indemnity, a tax to the Romans. Also, the Carthaginians lose their overseas territories, meaning their territory is now confined to areas just around Carthage itself. One last very important part of this treaty was that Carthage could not fight a war, any war, even a defensive war, without Rome's okay.
Com Cartago despida do poder militar, o campo estava aberto para o exército romano iniciar a completa conquista do mundo antigo. Seu primeiro alvo seria exatamente Cartago, que para se defender, agora só dispunha da fortaleza mais segura do mundo.
Hannibal ad portas, which translates to Hannibal is at the gates, was often used after the Second Punic War to scare children to bed.
150 a.C. Marco Pórcio Catão, orador romano e bisavô do famoso inimigo de Júlio César, passeava pelo Senado romano desatento ao que o cercava. Ele só tinha uma preocupação na cabeça: Cartago.
Cato was only too well aware of the strategic position of Carthage. He could see that as long as Carthage was an independent stronghold, it was too close to Sicily and Italy to be allowed to harass shipping or maintain a military presence. He wanted it completely wiped out.
Now in Carthage's one-time ally and neighbor, Numidia, starts to encroach on southern Carthaginian territory. Carthage feels obliged, and rightfully so, to defend itself, but there's a caveat. Since the Second Punic War, Carthage has promised Rome never to take up arms against anyone whatsoever without the consent of Rome. Rome sends a commission down to arbitrate this beef between Numidia and Carthage, and one of the deputies on that commission is Cato. And when Cato sees the prosperity with which Carthage has bounded back since the Second Punic War, he goes right back to Rome. He rails against the Senate that this prosperity means one thing and one thing only: Carthage is going to be at our doorstep with arms in no time. No matter what speech he makes, roads, politics, taxes, he always ends with Ceterum censeo Carthaginum esse delenda, which means, furthermore, I say Carthage should be destroyed. Now, Carthage, feeling it's going to be annihilated, no help from Rome, takes up arms. Rome sends an army down to Carthage. Rome tells Carthage, you have to abandon and evacuate your city. Carthage refuses. Thus starts the Third Punic War. But now Rome has got a problem, because the strongest fortifications in all of antiquity at that time are the walls of Carthage.
O tempo reduziu a fortaleza às fundações. Mas em 149 a.C., as muralhas eram a última esperança da cidade.
It was a three-part wall system with massive stone circuit wall. It covered a huge extent and was thought to be unbeatable.
A wonder of the world, those Carthaginian walls. And the Carthaginians trusted them.
A muralha tinha circunferência de 40 quilômetros e uma série de 3 muros defensivos. Primeiro, uma trincheira, respaldada por uma parede baixa e escorada, ocupada por soldados da linha de frente que podiam recuar rapidamente em caso de ataque. O segundo muro era de pedra e dominava as defesas exteriores. Atrás dele erguia-se um terceiro muro, mais alto e impenetrável, de quase 15 metros de altura e 9 de largura. 15 guaritas espaçavam-se a intervalos de 200 metros, onde sentinelas montavam guarda.
Inside this wall lived part of the Carthaginian army, including 20,000 men, 300 elephants, prepared for any type of attack that took place.
Esse sistema que cercava Cartago fazia dela a mais bem fortificada cidade do Mediterrâneo, talvez do mundo. Para enfrentar os romanos, o teste seria decisivo. E no comando estava o grande general cartaginês Hasdrubal.
The Carthaginian commander who would lead the Carthaginians during the Third Punic War was Hasdrubal. He is the one responsible for retaliating against the Numidians, and he is the guy who's going to be leading the main resistance.
À medida que os romanos se aproximavam, os cartagineses se uniram para formar nova frente defensiva.
The women gave their hair up. They cut their hair so that they could make rope to fire the catapults. They emptied the prisons. The old men volunteered. People who hadn't been blacksmiths for 20 years said, I'll try again. And they rearmed themselves in an explosion of intent and determination that we really have to go to the siege by the Germans of Stalingrad to see again.
Em 2 meses de trabalho frenético, eles produziram 6.000 escudos, 18.000 espadas, 30.000 lanças, 120 navios e 60.000 mísseis de catapulta. Apesar de todo esse arsenal, Roma enviara uma força esmagadora. A cidade viu-se sozinha para enfrentar a destruição.
There was no area left alone without Rome or Roman allies, with none of the colonies in a position to stand up to Rome. Carthage was left on her own.
O povo se abrigou por trás das grandes fortificações, esperando contra todas as previsões que a muralha repelisse a iminente invasão romana.
Carthage held off the Roman attack for 3 years, and even in the last days after the Romans broke through the walls, it took 7 days before they could get to the top of the citadel, of moving through town like a juggernaut.
O sítio romano exauriu as forças vitais da cidade. Por fim, embora a imensa muralha jamais fosse rompida, os romanos conseguiram escalá-la do lado do mar. Intramuros, houve uma luta de morte em cada rua. Restaram poucos soldados cartagineses, mas eram tão ferozes que o comandante romano, Cipião Emiliano, preferiu arrasar a cidade incendiando-a. Milhares de cartagineses foram queimados vivos nessa fogueira.
It was a firestorm. It must have been hellish for the residents, people fleeing.
Entre o sítio e a queda, Cartago foi dizimada. A população caiu de 500 para 50.000. Os sobreviventes foram vendidos como escravos e jamais voltaram à pátria.
It took just 17 days in the year 146 BC for Carthage to be completely destroyed by fire. That same year, Rome leveled Corinth, put Greece in their pocket, and overnight the Mediterranean Sea became their own private lake. Carthage would rise again, albeit this time reconstructed by Rome, like this fantastic amphitheater here at Elgin. By the 3rd century AD, Carthage would thrive once more as a commercial port. But although undeniably Roman, the spirits and the voices of Dido and Anno the Navigator and Hasdrubal and Hamilcar and Hannibal would echo throughout those Roman walls, begging to be remembered for the remarkable achievements of their civilization. And if you listen well, you can still hear those voices whispering among the ruins that are Carthage. For the History Channel, I'm Peter Weller.